you are not regretting what you said. You are regretting what your nervous system predicts it just cost you, and it makes that prediction before you even finish the sentence. Quick thing while we are here, we are building toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription genuinely helps this channel reach people who actually want the deep mechanics, not the recycled quotes. And if this hits a nerve, tapping like helps the algorithm put it in front of the right brains. All right, back to the uncomfortable part. You know the feeling. You finally say the true thing, not the polite thing, not the strategically vague thing, the true thing. And there is this microsecond of relief, like pressure leaving a valve. Then your stomach drops. Your mind starts replaying every word like it is evidence in a trial. You start drafting apology texts you do not even want to send. You wonder if you just ruined the relationship, your job, your reputation, your whole future. And what is weird is that the regret feels instant, like it was waiting for you. Most people explain this as I am anxious or I overthink. That is not wrong, but it is shallow. What I have discovered, and what research across social threat, prediction, and self-conscious emotions supports, is that instant regret is not a personality flaw. It is a coordination signal. It is your brain trying to renegotiate your position in a social system faster than the system can punish you. Here is what is actually happening, and it is going to sound a little brutal. When you speak your mind, you create a new version of yourself in other people's heads, and your brain treats that as a survival event. Think about this for a second. Your body reacts to a sentence as if it is a physical action. That is because to the brain, social consequences are not metaphorical. Social exclusion, status loss, and being labelled difficult used to mean fewer resources and less protection. Today it means something more subtle but still real. Less access, less trust, less opportunity. Your nervous system does not care that it is 2026 and you can order groceries from your phone. It is still running old code. But that is only the first layer. The interesting part is why regret hits hardest right after truth-telling, not after lying. The first mechanism is what I call social latency panic. When you speak, the social system does not respond instantly. There is a delay, a pause, a facial expression you cannot read, a text that does not get answered for an hour. That gap is not empty. Your brain fills it with worst-case simulations because uncertainty is more threatening than bad news. Neuroscientists call this predictive processing. The brain is basically a prediction machine trying to minimize surprise. When you say something risky, prediction error spikes. You do not know what the outcome will be, so your brain starts generating threat models to cover the unknown. And because negative outcomes are more costly than positive outcomes are beneficial, the models skew negative. That is not pessimism. That is loss aversion applied to social reality. Let me show you what I mean. You tell your friend, I felt dismissed when you joked about that. They go quiet. Maybe they look away. In that silence, your brain does not think. They are processing. Your brain thinks I just changed the relationship contract and they are about to punish me. Your heart rate changes not because your words were wrong, but because you are temporarily blind to the social feedback you use to regulate safety. Notice the pattern here. The regret grows in the space where you cannot predict the other person. Now here is where it gets interesting. If regret was only about fear of rejection, it would happen whenever you disagree. But it does not. It spikes when you say something that reveals you. This brings us to mechanism 2, identity leakage. You do not just communicate information. You communicate what kind of person you are. Every honest statement is a tiny identity confession. I need. I do not like. I will not accept. Those sentences are not only content, they are boundaries. and boundaries are status moves. Not always aggressive, but always consequential. If you grew up in an environment where belonging was conditional, your brain learned a very specific rule. Do not reveal needs unless you can pay for the consequences. That learning becomes automatic. So when you speak your mind as an adult, you are not only speaking to the person in front of you, you are triggering an old internal evaluator that says, that was too much, that was dangerous. Retract. This is why instant regret often feels childish, like a younger part of you took the microphone and now the adult part is panicking. That is not a poetic metaphor. It is how memory systems work. Emotional learning is stored in fast associative networks that fire before conscious reasoning catches up. Your cortex can explain, but your body decides first. And if you are thinking, okay, but I do not have trauma, good. You do not need trauma for this. You only need conditioning. Even a relatively normal upbringing teaches you that certain truths are expensive. Say the wrong thing at the wrong time and you get labelled. You get mocked. You get managed. Social groups train you like an algorithm trains a model. Punish the outputs you do not like, reward the outputs you do. But there is a third mechanism that almost nobody talks about, and it explains the most confusing version of regret. When you say something correct, even necessary, and you still feel guilty like you committed a crime. That mechanism is role violation guilt. Most relationships are not built on explicit agreements. They are built on roles: the peacemaker, the competent one, the low-maintenance one, the funny one, the one who never needs anything. And these roles stabilize groups because everyone can predict everyone else. When you speak your mind in a way that breaks your assigned role, the group loses predictive stability and your brain tries to restore it by pulling you back into character. So you feel regret not because your statement was wrong, but because it was out of script. Let me make this painfully concrete. If you are the easygoing friend and you finally say, actually, I'm not okay with always being the one who drives, you might get an instant wave of shame. Not because driving is sacred, but because you just violated the identity that kept you safe inside the group. Your nervous system is basically saying, we survived by being easy. Do not become difficult. And here is the part that stings. Sometimes the regret is accurate. Not because truth is bad, but because the group was never built to tolerate your full self. Stay with me, because this next part recontextualizes everything. The reason regret feels instant is because it is not just emotion. It is an internal bargaining strategy. Your brain is running a game theory calculation in real time. It is asking, did I just defect from cooperation? Even when you are being honest, honesty can be interpreted as defection if the group was benefiting from your silence. In repeated games, which is basically what relationships are, your long-term payoff depends on trust and predictability. When you suddenly reveal a hidden preference or boundary, you change the game. And your brain immediately tries to anticipate retaliation, withdrawal, criticism, gossip, loss of warmth. So it pushes you toward appeasement behaviors like over-explaining, softening, and adding disclaimers, or walking it back. This is why you might say something true and then immediately add, but it is fine, do not worry about it, which is a sentence designed to erase the impact of the truth you just told. Not because you do not mean it, because you are trying to preserve the relationship while also updating its terms. It is diplomacy. Except your body experiences diplomacy as danger. Now flip everything I just said. Sometimes instant regret is not your fear of them. It is your fear of you. Here is the deeper layer. When you speak your mind, you discover what you are capable of saying, and that is information about your future behavior. Your brain treats that as risky because it reduces your ability to predict yourself. Most people think self-control is what keeps them safe, but a huge part of safety is self-predictability. And you want to believe you can keep the peace, that you can tolerate, that you can swallow it. The moment you speak your mind, you prove you can break your own silence. That is a shift in self-model. So the regret is partly your mind scrambling to restore the old identity, the version of you who is manageable, who will not rock the boat, who will not create consequences. Notice how that explains a strange phenomenon. You regret honesty more when you are calm than when you are angry. When you are angry, you have an excuse. When you are calm, it means this is deliberate, and deliberate means it might happen again. That terrifies the part of you that built a life around being harmless. Now here is a question that will make you uncomfortable in a productive way. Why do you regret speaking your mind more with some people than others? Because regret is not only internal, it is an accurate read of the other person's tolerance for reality. Some people have high psychological bandwidth. They can hear a hard truth without collapsing into defensiveness or punishment. With them, you might feel nervous, but you do not feel contaminated afterward. Other people are low bandwidth. They treat feedback as attack. They treat boundaries as betrayal. They treat your honesty as a threat to their control. With them, your nervous system has learned, through repeated evidence, that truth creates chaos. So it triggers regret instantly as a protective reflex. That means your regret is sometimes a diagnostic tool. It is data. Not about whether you should have spoken, but about what kind of environment you are in. But we still have not explained the most haunting version. You say something, you are objectively polite, even kind, and then you cannot sleep. Your mind keeps producing new angles of how you might have sounded. It is like your brain is trying to reverse, engineer the other person's interpretation. That is mechanism 4, mentalizing overload. Mentalizing is your capacity to model other minds. It is one of the most powerful human abilities, and it is also a trap. After a vulnerable statement, mentalizing ramps up because the stakes feel high. You start simulating, what did they think I meant? What did they infer? What story are they telling about me now? If you have a high empathy trait, or you grew up having to read moods to stay safe, your mentalizing system is extremely sensitive. And so after you speak your mind, it does not stop. It spins. It keeps generating narratives, trying to find the one that minimizes threat. And because you cannot access their actual thoughts, you default to the narrative that best explains your anxiety, which is usually the most self-blaming one. I sounded rude. I am selfish. I made it weird. That is not insight. That is your brain using shame to regain control. Shame is a social emotion designed to prevent you from being cast out. It makes you smaller, quieter, less demanding. In other words, shame is a behavior-shaping technology, and instant regret is shame's way of jumping in before the world can even react. Now watch what happens when we apply this to modern life. We are not only talking face-to-face anymore, we are speaking into delays and screens and permanent records. Text messages, emails, voice notes. That increases social latency panic because feedback is slower and ambiguity is higher. It also increases identity leakage because your words can be screenshot and reinterpreted later. Your brain knows this, so the cost of speaking your mind feels higher than it used to. This is why you can say something in a perfectly normal tone, and then your brain suddenly remembers that it exists in writing. Regret spikes because permanence spikes. Okay? So what do you do with this besides diagnosing yourself? Here is the payoff. I want to give you a framework that is actually usable in real conversations. Not be confident, not just be yourself. A real model. I call it the 3 risk stack: belonging risk, status risk, and self-consistency risk. Belonging risk is the fear of being rejected or emotionally punished. Status risk is the fear of being downgraded, seen as difficult, dramatic, incompetent, needy, disloyal. Self-consistency risk is the fear that you just became a person who says things and now you have to live with that version of yourself. Instant regret happens when all three fire at once. And the reason this model matters is that each risk has a different solution. If you treat them like one blob called anxiety, you will use the wrong tool. Let me show you what I mean. If your regret is mostly belonging risk, you do not need to retract your truth. You need to reduce uncertainty. You need feedback, not reassurance, feedback. Ask a clean question like, I want to make sure I said that clearly. How did that land for you? That collapses the latency gap, which is what your nervous system cannot tolerate. If your regret is mostly status risk, the fix is not apologizing, it is framing. Status is about perceived intent and competence, so you clarify intent and keep your spine. I am bringing this up because I value our relationship and I want it to work better. That tells the other person, this is a cooperative move, not a power grab. If your regret is mostly self-consistency risk, you are not scared of them, you are scared of your own boundary. The move there is internal alignment. You privately decide what this truth implies for your future behavior, because regret thrives when your statement commits you to something you have not accepted yet. If you say, I cannot keep doing this, your brain panics because it hears consequences, so you calmly decide the next step, even if it is small. Next time, I will say no earlier. Once the future is defined, your body stops treating the present as a cliff. Here is the meta pattern behind all of it. Regret is not a moral verdict. It is a forecasting error signal. Your brain is predicting social cost with incomplete data. Sometimes the prediction is wrong, and you learn that honesty is safe with that person. Sometimes the prediction is right, and you learn that your safety depended on silence. Either way, regret is not proof you should have stayed quiet. It is proof that you touched a live wire in the social system. And once you see it that way, you can do something that changes your life. You can stop using regret as a command. You can treat it like a dashboard light. It tells you which risk stack is active. It tells you whether you need clarity, framing, or alignment. It tells you what kind of relationship ecosystem you are in. And it tells you something else, something most people never admit. If speaking your mind reliably produces instant regret, you are living in a world where your truth has been priced as a luxury. That does not mean you go scorched earth. It means you get honest about the trade you have been making. Silence in exchange for stability. Performance in exchange for belonging. Predictability in exchange for closeness. So here is a challenge for the next week. The next time you feel that instant regret, do not rush to erase yourself. Pause and ask one question. Which risk am I actually reacting to? Belonging, status, or self-consistency? Because the moment you can name the risk, you stop being owned by it. And if you start noticing that the regret only appears around certain people, you'll ask the even sharper question. Is my nervous system overreacting, or is it finally telling the truth about the environment? If this changed how you interpret that stomach drop feeling, I would genuinely like to hear what you notice in the comments. And remember this the next time you say the real thing and your body panics afterward. Regret is not proof you did something wrong. It is proof you said something that matters.